This video is going to cover creating a React Native mobile application using Expo and a Ruby on Rails backend that we host on a DigitalOcean app. Now we're going to be glossing over some of the details, like we're only going to be grabbing the post. We won't be doing the CRUD actions because I have a 2-hour tutorial that covers all of the CRUD actions with React and Rails that I'll link down below. We'll also be glossing over some of the production stuff, like we won't be using a persistent database because we're using a basic app on DigitalOcean, but I've covered setting up a production server before. You can also apply that here. I'm trying to break these out, otherwise this video would have been a 4-hour long tutorial for just a basic mobile app, so hopefully you can bear with me. But for the sake of this one, I'll have it on screen and you can sort of see what the mobile app looks like. Just a basic Expo app that you can use as a starting point to then create your mobile applications with Rails. Okay, that's enough for me. Let's go ahead and let's get started by running a Rails new command. So we'll say Rails new, and I'll call this React-mobile-video. And I'll pass in --API to generate this as an API. I'll cd into the project, and then I'll run a code dot to open this up. So what I did for this was I ran a Rails G scaffold, called it post, and I gave each post a title of type string by default and a body of type text. And then after that was done, I ran a Rails db:/migrate command. You then go ahead and close that. The next thing I did was I came into the gem file, and in the gem file, I uncommented the rack-cores gem, and then I ran a bundle command to install that. I then came into config environments production.rb, and I searched for the config.forceSSL, and I set that to true. After I did that, I came into the initializers in the cores.rb. I uncommented this, and for the origin, I passed in an asterisk. Once I finished with that, I then came over to the routes.rb. Now in here, we're going to replace this post with a namespace for the API, with the namespace of v1, and then the resources for the posts. Then we can come up into our app controllers, and in here we have to create a new folder, call this API. Inside the API folder, we'll create a new folder called V1. And inside of V1, we just want to drag our post controller. Once we're inside of the post controller, we can scope it. So we can say API : V1 : Now your create action is going to be broken unless you specifically route to the path where you expect the post to exist. Because we changed this to API v1, it now needs to have the API v1 prefix. The final thing we have to do is we have to generate a secret. For this, we can type Rails secret. That'll create a secret for us. We can then copy this and then run a all caps editor equals with quotes code -- wait Rails credentials : edit. We can then come in here to the secret key base and paste in our new secret key. Press Control S, Control W to close it, and then it'll tell you the file was encrypted and saved. At this point, we can run a Rails_env = production Rails C just to make sure that our production environment is working. We can come over here and I'm going to go to localhost port 3000, API, v1, and posts. If I want to test creating a post, I can create a request in here inside of Postman. Now Postman's a free application that just allows you to test API endpoints. In this case, I can change my get to a post. I can put in the path of localhost port 3000 API v1 posts. I can pass in the structure for what I expect a post request to look like. And I can come over to the headers. I can get rid of the text plain content type, and I can replace that with a content type of application/JSON. Now, if I run this was my previous result with another application. You'll see that the timestamps change and we have different words in here. Now, if I wanted to create a second post and call it a second post, I can send this and you'll see that we now have a second post being created. If we come over to our actual API, you can see that the posts are being displayed. If we come back over to Postman, we can change this to a GET request. And you can see here that it's returning the 2 posts inside of our response. But okay, it's time for us to start installing some dependencies. The first one we're going to install is going to be Expo. Expo is going to be a application that wraps around the React Native client, and it just makes your life a little bit easier. You can always eject out of Expo if you would like down the line to work in the underlying React Native. The next thing we'll do is we'll install the Expo CLI, and then finally we'll run an Expo init blog. It's going to ask you for some options here. You can either go with blank or with TypeScript. I'm going to go with a blank TypeScript example. That's just going to create a blank Expo project that just has TypeScript. We can now cd into our blog. Now that we have our application created, let's come over to our Expo project, which is this blog project, and let's get started in here. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to add React Native paper. You can do this by running the yarn add React Native paper command. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to run a yarn add command for React-native-vector-icons, React-native link, and React-native-vector icons. Now, this is just coming straight off of the React Native paper documentation, but I think one of these is going to error out here. It's the link one, and we can just ignore that for now. At this point, we can run a sanity check, so we'll just run a yarn start to make sure that the application is working. If you're planning on running this on Android, you're going to want to download an app on the Android store called the Expo client. In my case, I'm going to be using Android, so I'm going to be downloading the Expo client on my Android phone. You do have some other options available to you though. You can see right here, it tells you to scan it with Expo Go if you're on Android, or the camera app on iOS. The way this works is you scan this and it will open up the application on your mobile device. 1, 2, 3. Now I'm going to click the scan on Expo button, and then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to hover it over the QR code, and it'll very quickly open up the app for me. Now you're going to see here that the app actually times out. And the reason for that is we have to hit D in our console here to open up the developer tools. And then we have to switch this to a tunnel mode. Tunnel mode will also expose your localhost URLs. So that is something else to consider if you're planning on using your localhost. I'm now going to click the scan QR code again. And you can see here that it's bundling the JavaScript, and we should see something in the terminal as well as this progresses. Looks like it's done, and now you can see open up app.tsx to start working on your mobile application. This will update in real time. I'm not going to keep this running, but you're more than welcome to keep the application running as you work through the rest of this tutorial. In my case, what I'll do is I'll just grab this URL, open it up in my Brave browser, open it up in Brave, and then I'll just click run in web browser. And then I'll copy this, open this up in Brave, and now I'll have something that I can look at in real time while we work through the rest of this. Now we're going to have a bit of a folder structure here that I'd like to create, so let's start there. We're going to come into blog, and inside of blog, we're going to create a new folder and call this app. Inside of app, we'll create another new folder, call this API. Inside of app again, we'll create another new folder, call this components. And then inside of app, we'll create a third folder, and we'll call this one screens. We're going to create a file inside of screens and call it blogscreen.tsx because it's going to be a React component. I'm going to save this just as a default for now, so we have something inside of it. We'll come over to our components, create a new file, and call the first one blogpost.tsx. And we'll do the same thing. We'll type rfce, wait for Emmett to catch up, and then we'll save this. Create a new file, call this one navbar.tsx, and we'll do the same thing in here, rfce, and then we'll hit save. The final thing we have to do is create our API file. For this, we'll call this one blogapi.ts, and we'll get started in here by creating our API endpoint. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to throw in an API URL. This is going to point to localhost port 3000/API/v1. The next thing I'm going to do is create a post interface. This is just going to be a very basic interface of what I expect a post to look like. It's going to have an ID, a title, and a body. Next, we're going to create a async function called getPosts. This is what we're going to use to actually retrieve our posts. Now, based on the postman from earlier, we know that we're going to have some request info where this is going to be a get method and have a content type of application/JSON. Our actual response is going to look like this, where we run a fetch to the API URL/posts, and then we pass in the request info. At this point, this request looks exactly like the one that we have over here. Next, we need to actually get the posts out of this response. So we're going to run const posts equals await response.json. We can then do some console logs just to make sure that everything's working, and then we'll return posts. Now, as a bit of a bonus, if you are interested in creating a post from the mobile application, I also have a unused interface here, which is just a new post payload. So what you would expect to pass into your create action. And I also have a untested create post function here that takes in a payload of that type, and it just passes in the body as a stringified payload, and then it creates a fetch request to the post endpoint. Now, I haven't tested this, but this seems like it would work to me. I just thought I would mention it in case you are interested in taking this tutorial a step further. Next, we're going to come over to the app.tsx, and we're going to do some stuff in here. We're going to start off by creating a paper provider, and we need to import this paper provider. So we're going to say import provider as paper provider. We're going to say from React Native paper. Inside this paper provider, we're going to have a safe area view, which we'll close off down here. Now, a safe area view just allows us to ensure that if the phone has a notch, this will be displayed below the camera notch. Next, we'll come inside of the safe area view and we'll create a headline that just says hello world. At this point, we should probably include our styling. We'll come down here, we'll overwrite the old styling and include some new styling instead. Then import the headline, and we can fix our component issue here. Now import the safe area view to fix that error, and then we'll add in a view, and inside of this view, we will create our first custom component called blog screen. Now we already created this file, so we'll just control period, add the import, and then we're done inside of our app.tsx. You can see here, it's already displaying the hello world as well as the blog screen from our blog screen component. Inside of the blog screen, we're going to create a use state for the posts, which means we're going to have to import use state. We're going to get rid of this named export and instead just export the function. We're then going to run a use effect, which means we're going to have to import use effect. Inside of this use effect, we're going to call get posts, which is just the function we created earlier. And then we're going to call .then and pass in the posts. We now need to import this get posts, which we'll do right here. And then we can move on to the return. First thing we'll do is we'll get rid of this div and replace it with a scroll view. That means we'll have to add in an import from React Native. We'll then do another safe area view, which means we'll have to import that. You can then run a posts and post.map just to make sure the posts exist, because the first time through they won't. Then we can run a post map. Inside of this, we're going to create a view, give each view a post ID as the key. That just stops React from complaining about not having a key associated with the child. We'll then create a blog post, which is the component we created earlier, where we pass in props of title and body that are equal to the post information. You can run control dot again to import this component. We're going to get an error here that just says this isn't accessible on the props of the component. Inside of our blog post, we'll want to create an interface for blog post props. We can then replace the empty params here with a props of type blog post props. We'll want some styles here, so we'll just create a const styles. We'll get rid of this blog post div and replace it with a card. It means we'll have to import the card from React Native paper. We'll close the card down here. Create a card.title and pass in the props.title. We'll then create a card.content and we'll import the paragraph. Create a fake image for the background, and we'll just use a lorem pixum image from pixum.photos, and it'll be of size 700. You can then create some fake buttons here just to see how buttons look inside of a mobile app that just say cancel and OK. We can press save to save this blog. We can then come back to our blog screen and clean up my mess by including the closing parentheses and the brace here for our mapping. We can then add a brace around the blog screen because I changed how this is laid out. And now we should see our stuff rendering on our actual application. This is essentially what we expect to see on the production server, but we're going to want to run a seed command first just to give ourselves some data. Let's come over to our Explorer. Come down to DB and seeds. And inside of here, let's just create some dummy data. I'm going to create 3 posts. I'll give each one a title and a body. In this case, the first 2 bodies are just the first 2 lines of comments here. And then the third one is just a title of all right and a body of testy boy. This is a super serious tutorial, by the way. We'll then run a git add dot git commit -m of init commit, and then we'll run a git push. We don't have a remote repository yet though. We'll come over to GitHub. We'll create a new repository. This is just an empty one. I'm going to be using SSH because I have my keys set up. I'm going to click copy, come over to my terminal and paste it in and then hit enter. I'm going to refresh and see that my application is up on GitHub. Next step is to come over to digitalocean.com. Once you're inside of your dashboard, you're going to come over and you're going to create a new app under the apps dropdown. You're going to come over here and click GitHub. This should sync up with your GitHub account. In my case, I called the repository React-Rails-Mobile-Video. So I'm going to click that. The branch I want to auto deploy from is going to be main. So every time I push to main, I'm going to get a new build sent out to my application. Once you're inside here, it's going to give you some options. The first one we need to deal with is the environment variables. Because of how Rails works, your key is going to be encrypted and you're not going to be able to access your environment variables without accessing this master.key file. In my case, I have this master.key file here, but I didn't push it up to my Git repo because you don't want this to be on the internet. What you can do instead is set a Rails master key and give it a value equal to the master.key. You can press the encrypt button and then press the plus if you want to add more environment variables. In this case, I only have 1, so I'm going to hit close. We don't use a build command, but instead for our run command, we can enter this down and we'll run a Rails db:/migrate command and then a Rails db:/seed command. After those 2 are done, we can then run the Rails server. The rest of this is okay to leave as a default option. It'll then ask you to name your web service and select your region. I'm going to leave these as a default. It's then going to ask you which tier of service you would like. In my case, I'm going to click basic and I'm going to click the $5 option. Now, if you would like to have 2 months free hosting, I do have an affiliate code that I'll have linked down below. This is just going to give you $100 of credit that you can use for 2 months. After that, it'll expire and you'll have to go onto the $5 payment plan, but it'll at least let you try this tutorial with some free credit. Of course, that helps me out by giving me a $25 credit if you end up spending $25 at some point in the future with DigitalOcean. I'll have the link down below in the video description. Back into our application, basic with the $5 a month. I'm going to click Launch Basic App. At this point, you can go ahead and grab a drink because you're going to be here for about 5 to 10 minutes while this application builds. After about 5 minutes, the application is up and running and we can go check it out by going to this URL right here. Initially, it's going to say nothing was found, but if we navigate to /API/v1/posts, you'll see that we have an API that has our 3 seeded posts inside of it. Now let's try and use this inside of our mobile application. We're going to copy this URL and we're going to come back into our app. In our app, we're going to come over to our blog API. We're going to replace this URL right here with the URL that we copied. We'll get rid of this /posts at the end and we'll save this. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and run a yarn start again to start our app. We'll hit D to open up our developer tools. We'll switch this to tunnel mode. Once we're done with that, we can come over to our application, click the scan QR code and scan the QR code on the screen. And then if we come over to our console again and hit R, it should force reload the application. See here, we've reloaded it and we're printing our information to the terminal that we put inside of our get posts earlier. And on the mobile app side of things, you can now see the posts being pulled from the database that's hosted on the DigitalOcean app. That's going to do it for this first tutorial on using a mobile app with React Native and Rails as the backend. If you'd like to see more of this, maybe including user accounts in the future, please let me know down below. Your feedback does help here because I actually don't know how popular this tutorial topic is going to be. If I don't see that much interest in it, then I won't create follow-up content. That's going to do it for me. If you want to take this tutorial a step further and implement the other CRUD actions for the React app, I do have a React tutorial that implements a Rails backend for all of the CRUD actions that you can watch on screen right now.